Good afternoon. I'm Kathleen Dulaski, the founder of the Education Design Lab and host for the panel that you're about to hear. So our topic today is who will solve the skills gap, colleges, employers, or tech giants? And we have a really interesting panel here today to debate this issue. And obviously COVID has really sped things up in terms of the trends and the indicators that suggest where things will be in the next 3 to 5 years. If you've been living in the innovation bubble, and most of us have, particularly during COVID, you've been reading that the degree is dead, or at least its star is falling. So what does that mean, and what trends are we seeing? It definitely is speeding up what's happening with who's delivering skills. Early stats are worrying on the part of colleges. So community college enrollment, if you didn't see it, was just announced, it is down 8% since COVID. And community colleges were already seeing interesting trends towards shorter term learning and just-in-time training. Black enrollment across all institution types this summer was also down about 8%. And there are many other trends related to education that are concerning. Are people holding off getting reskilled or upskilled, or are they looking for shorter term and surefire training paths that just aren't showing up in that college data that we're looking at? We see that we are quickly moving to an age where employers will be more valuable validators of learning than colleges can be, and that's because skills are just moving too fast for colleges to deliver quick turnaround credentialing, and they don't necessarily have the faculty that's up to date on the newest skills. However, for now, most of the funding for post-secondary learning is controlled by colleges to the tune of like $46 billion a year, and the federal government spends another $18 billion on job training and then corporate training on top of that. So what trends are we seeing that are starting to, that show signs that different groups besides colleges might be filling the vacuum? First, we have just a few really big examples of employers who are marketing their own pathways to give learners clarity for how to get hired. So Google's one example we'll hear about on the panel, IBM, Salesforce. Tech giants are poised to create a new marketplace for skills. It's already sort of happening. So if you own the platform, will they end up owning the transaction and therefore also delivering skills? You see signs that even groups like Amazon are starting to offer skills packages, and you can imagine the day when you could click on your shopping cart and get your cyber security training package, right? So if all this is happening, what role should community colleges or any colleges be playing? How do they have to, defend their position, if you will, if things are changing? And just coincidentally, the lab, the Education Design Lab, is announcing today 6 regions where we'll be supporting the capacity building of community colleges in this work. And so now turning to the panel, let me introduce, I'll do a very quick introduction round. I'm going to start at the bottom right with Rufus Glasper, who is CEO of the League of Innovation in the Community College, and he's also the former chancellor of the Maricopa Community Colleges in the Phoenix area. Moving up, Andrew Flagel is the CEO of the Washington, D.C. Consortium of Colleges, which represents 17 of the areas of colleges and universities, the 4th largest such in the country, I believe. John Farrar is industry leader at Google for Education. And Ryan O'Mahony is director of short courses at 2U, an organization that you probably all know about. So let's start with the round. We'd like each of you to take a stand. Who will solve the skills gap, and how accelerated will these trends be? If you were an investor and you were going to bet, which sector would you bet on? So let's start with Rufus and start with traditional colleges and maybe not so traditional colleges, which you represent. Could you speak, Rufus, to why it's been difficult for community colleges to deliver, what employers need now, particularly at scale? You're on mute.
All right, I'm there. Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. You know, it's difficult for community colleges to move forward because they're concerned about the pathways that we are currently involved in. Over the years, we've been focused on guided pathways, and we have this transition from access to retention to completion to jobs. And that's the focus we have now. With the pandemic, we have been pushed to think about how we will get there faster, quicker, smarter, and more innovatively. And with that, we still have in the back of our minds the notion of accreditation, of the traditional role of faculty, and whether or not community colleges can move at the speed of industry. And when you think about how fast industry is moving now, it is moving faster than we can provide professional development for our faculty to go out for 6 months or 3 months or whatever, and then in order to engage them. So I think if we can get through some of these fear factors, and quite frankly, this is the opportunity to do it. The pandemic has provided an opportunity for us to develop micro-credentials, micro-pathways, of which I know Education Design Lab is working on, but also fast-track programs so we can put people back to work. And if we try to maintain the integrity of guided pathways in order to get there, many of the jobs will not be available for those who need them at this point in time. But for those who would like to move in that direction, and our colleges are willing, then we can provide these fast-track programs, link them to a guided pathway, and if they want to go back to a 2-year or 4-year degree, they can do that. But if we look in the rearview mirror and we think that policies and accreditation will stop us from doing that, we need to think about the employer. And if the employer is willing to hire a student now with the fast-track programs, with the ability to be promoted and move forward, then we should move forward, place our students in the job by working with the industries and listening to the industries, and then we can talk about the accreditation and others later or simultaneously. So I think there's an opportunity, but I think there's also a fear factor about if we move too fast and out of structure, then we will be in trouble with whoever is the overseer at what level of governance we're involved in.
But there's also a fear factor that if we don't move, other types of organizations, new providers are going to take our market share, eclipse us. Andrew, let's speak to that. Could you speak specifically to the enrollment cliff that colleges see coming around 2025, at least for traditional age students? And how does COVID exacerbate that?
Yeah, it's fascinating to look ahead just a few years because we know that we're facing this massive gap in students as we see, the estimate, Nathan Graw and his demographic work is estimating that we're going to see 5% and then 15%, 20 to 25% overall over the next decade, which comes out somewhere around 100,000 students a year falling out of the system in the Northeast. Now, this is demographic, right? This isn't students deciding not to go to college. This is, as they called it, the birth dearth now hitting us we like rhyming in higher education, which takes us to the demographic cliff that we're coming up on. So that massive shift needs to be offset if higher education is going to flourish and thrive. And it goes to a lot of the points that Rufus was making, although I'd push back a little on the idea that entrusting students, particularly our most vulnerable students, entirely to the decision-making of corporate America poses some challenges as well. And that what we need to do is think about how we can both be equitable and inclusive in helping students have social mobility while at the same time meeting the needs of the future workforce. So to be more effective, colleges are going to have to expand their markets. They need to look at that demography and realize the fastest growing groups are older Americans, the non-traditional age students. Some estimates are that in the next couple of decades, we're actually going to see nearly a doubling of students 65 and of individuals 65 and older. It wouldn't surprise us to see doubling of students. Right now of higher education across the board, less than 0.5% of our higher education students are 65 and older. But we know that group is more active than ever, more affluent than ever, and remaining in the workforce. So we need to be thinking about all of those older adults. We need to be thinking, as Rufus talked about, all of these students and how we have them be successful, retain them, graduate them, or as you said, Rufus, credential them, which leads to the need for clearer pathways. And not just the pathways as we've thought about it, Rufus, at the community college guided pathway level, but at the micro-credential level, at the ability to grab these pieces, but make sure that they fit together. And that there's a concept that students understand in the reasons they fit together, in the skills that they can get that will give them the opportunity to accelerate in the workforce, to be promotable and adaptable, because often the skills that corporate America wants most right now are needs that will not exist in 5 to 10 years. The previous panel was talking about AI and the jobs that are going to change. We need to prepare our students not just for the jobs that are most needed in the next 5 years, but to be able to adapt to the jobs that will be there in 10 to 20 years. So universities have to be a lot more transparent about how that works, what those essential learning outcomes are, and how they fit together in these credigrees or micro-credentials or whatever one wants to call them. And then I think in order to do that, we have to be far more collaborative. And that means breaking out of our shells. To answer your question, Kathleen, the first question on where the bets are, it's going to be the institutions that break out of this mold of being dreadful at interacting with corporate America. Mm-hmm. We've so siloed our work. In fact, we silo everything, right, in higher education. We silo our work with students, so we do handoffs from first marketing to orientation to counseling to enrollment to graduation and career services, so that you're never seeing the same person twice. No other organization would conduct relations with its most important constituency that way. And at the same time, we do that with corporate America. So any organizations that's intersecting with one of our major institutions, they're going to go one place with their alumni who work for them, another place with tech transfer, another place for students and contracting. We need to get a lot more sophisticated about our work with higher education, our work between higher education and corporate America, and I think with each other. How can universities collaborate? So the model that Rufus represents, and that actually all of us on the panel one way or another represent, is the idea of universities collaborating together and then working together really proactively and in innovative ways with private partners and with government partners for that matter. So where the bet would be, I think, is on those collaborations. It's probably not on one brand or one institution, but on groups of institutions that are willing to take the risk on stepping outside of themselves and working together to do something much more powerful.
Great. Well, let's go next to John, because John's what we call in the panel world a twofer, because you represent two sectors of our three, which is employers and tech giants. So you are with Google, and could you speak to why? Let's start with Grow for Google. I know you don't represent Grow with Google directly, but could you speak to why Google is putting out certificate programs? Because you've announced now three more after having one that has gone viral, if you could call it that, in the higher ed world. What gap for Google does that fill?
Yeah, let me do that, and I also want to answer your bet question, Kathleen. Sure. So I'll try to take both of those at once.
Okay.
And then steer me accordingly. You mentioned at the top a fair amount of press around higher ed, and I'll just say this: look, there's no bigger fan of higher ed than myself. Parents were public school teachers turned professors, and tech willing, they may even be listening right now. So we'll see. But as a result of that background, my own college experience, this job, I believe higher ed is the best macro facilitator of the entire learning experience, and will continue to be so going forward. That said, my aforementioned parents have their roots in psychology. They often reminded us at the dinner table that nobody changes their behavior in the midst of a comfortable situation. And I think if you looked at employers, you looked at higher ed, kind of comfortable. And as a result, little changed in terms of the learning format, and specifically our relationship between what Andrew referred to as corporate America, employers, and higher ed. There really wasn't much change there for a century. The students, on the other hand, I think have been uncomfortable with the arrival of COVID-19, are very uncomfortable. I think we can all agree that higher ed and employers are now uncomfortable. So we're all equally, all three units, now uncomfortable in the moment. And I think the good news about that is that we're all willing to innovate now. I think we're willing to change that conversation, and that's a good thing. At Google, we believe this innovation has to start with a more user-centric mindset. So there's got to be a paradigm flip, and maybe going from asking questions, what do institutions do, and on what timelines do they do them, to what do students need, and what are their timelines that they need. And I think we've been digging into this student mindset with our data, with our survey tools, really pretty vigorously over the last 5-6 months. And what we found is that students really have a much more razor focus on ROI now than ever before. They want a much more linear line of sight in terms of their investment to employment, right? And so to answer your question, the next 5 years, who's going to win that? The winner is going to be the institutions and companies that build this bridge that Andrew was referring to between employers and learning. We've known we've had to build that bridge for decades, but again, we're pretty comfortable, right? So now we know we need to build it, and we need to travel on it frequently, frankly. Those of us willing to get on that bridge early start to improve ROI for students by designing curriculum that provides transparency for learners and employers in terms of what students are learning and what the skills they've acquired as a function of their education. Those that get on board that early, provide that line of sight that I was just talking about, I think they're going to be the leaders here. So I guess, long story short, I'm betting on the dialogue that Andrew is espousing, and I'm just noticing it pick up speed in the last couple months. You want me to go to your Grow with Google?
Yeah, yes, I'd love to hear about that, because I think that's probably been one of the most concrete examples in the country of employers saying, okay, these are the pathways we want you to take, and this will help us solve our skills gap and maybe our competitors.
Yeah, look, Grow with Google, there are many things like this in the marketplace right now. I think you referenced Salesforce and IBM. Others are looking at approaches, and it's early on. The mission for Grow with Google is relatively simple, but it's demonstrating a commitment to unlock economic potential by creating new pathways to jobs, right? And I like Grow with Google because it's not theoretical. It's happening in real time, and we can start to see what it's doing. The goal is to support really students that either haven't gone to college or may not have plans to go to college, with access to high-paying career opportunities through entry-level education resources. So we're watching this unfold. So far, there's been 300,000 certificates completed. Since 2017, we've had more than 5 million Americans improve their businesses or careers by attending Grow with Google training, some of their in-person workshops. So it's multifaceted. But I think as an education ecosystem, we need to monitor together how all of these platforms, Grow with Google included, are being received by students, how they're interpreting them, and then, again, commit to this feedback loop between all of us, keep tabs on how things are evolving. And in terms of the gaps that it fills for us, I think all companies are looking for as many talent pipelines as they can possibly devise. And I think
Absolutely.
this is
A quick follow-up. Do you need a college or a community college or university to be able to deliver that, to deliver they're like 8-month pathways, for example, with your IT certificate? Or can you just offer it and then potentially interview the best candidates, or they go to your competitors as well?
Right now, it's a little bit of both, and I will tell you that the Grow with Google team is experimenting on distribution outlets, right? But again, this is kind of a real-time thing that's holding, which I think is exciting, and also, provides opportunities for evolution.
Well, it's a window into the future. I mean, obviously, 65% of Americans apparently work for smaller companies that, small businesses, and so they're not necessarily in line for those kinds of roles. But so it doesn't necessarily solve the skills gap for them, but it does create a lot more mobility in the marketplace for sure. Yeah. So let's go to. We'll come back to you, John, with another question, but let's go to Ryan to bring you into this conversation.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hello, and you're joining us from South Africa, which is exciting.
I am indeed. It's a little bit late here.
A little bit late. Well, thank you for staying up.
So it's a bit of moonlight shining here through the window.
We gave you the blue background. So could you speak to the move towards national skilling platforms, like Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, and someday potentially Amazon, as I mentioned in the beginning. They've got AWS right now, that kind of training, and robotics training, for example, cloud training. How will these compete or cooperate with employers are they another example of the kind of thing that, that John just talked about? Or do you only see them being really offered in concert with colleges?
Well, it's probably to your first question in terms of where we're going to take a stand. And so there's certainly a theme coming through of not competing, but collaborating. So I think you wanted us to all have a stand. It seems like we're all standing on the same side of the argument here. In South Africa, we have a saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And it certainly, I think, takes all parties here to collaborate in order to solve the skills gap. Personally, I think, if we look at these platforms and what they're doing, I think they serve a number of purposes. Number one, they certainly serve to create an access or a market to the student or the consumer. Somebody's searching on Google, or they're looking for career opportunities in LinkedIn, or doing their shopping on Amazon and looking for the tab for their skills package, perhaps. And then secondly, I think what it does is, for those students, they get the opportunity to really research the subject. So they get to maybe watch some content that's freely available. And what LinkedIn Learning does really well is they offer micro-learning experiences, things that are immediately on tap that someone can access right away to help solve a problem. But I think when it comes to trying to compete, where actually this institution now becomes the body that's doing the curriculum, that is doing the credential, and they're trying to compete on more immersive macro learning experiences. And when I say macro learning, I'm talking about really transformative, rigorous courses of study, and that's really where I think real skills development happens. That's when the neural pathways get drilled into your brain that leads to skills development. I think when they're doing that, I think it's going to be more of a challenge. And I think if they're competing with universities and colleges, which really have been the trusted brands of social mobility through education for centuries, I think it's going to be difficult. So I certainly think that there's potential for collaboration. We're all talking the same thing. I know clearly John and Andrew are as well, and I know you, Kathleen, and Rufus have spoke about this workforce integrated model where employers and universities combine. I think that there's a real role for the platforms to play in helping universities and colleges identify where the gaps are in their curriculum, where the demand for these skills are. And then in the case for, I'm from 2U, as a partner to try and help accelerate the development of these courses, which we do in what we call alternative credentials, like short courses and boot camps, where many of our partners are engaging with us to develop in these areas like that. We're talking about coding and skills. But I think if we think about the skills gap as well, we've got to think about it as it's not just a narrow skills gap in technical subject matter, which clearly I think is the place we normally go to when we think of the skills gap. But and Andrew, I know you agree that we found with some of our research we recently done on the future of work, a report that we released this week, that there's, when it comes to other human skills, are certainly also missing. Here we're talking about critical thinking, analytical thinking, interpersonal skills, leadership. Like, these are not just skills that are in demand, but as much, if not more so, than the technical skills that are required. So when we're talking about preparing for the jobs in 10, 20 years, Andrew, but we're thinking about these human skills as well. We're thinking about leadership. I mean, the pandemic, we talk about accelerating change. What's also exposed is where we have clearly a shortage globally of qualified healthcare workers and nurses. Now, that's where medical schools play in terms of how they solve for those skills gaps. So I do believe, if I had to make a bet, and clearly I have, is I believe that universities and colleges are the key ones to solve here. But I do believe that it is this village that is going to work together, where we all can collaborate and each play our part in how we can help with this problem.
So we're going to go to audience questions in a minute, but I want to put a pin on what you said. One thing that was really interesting is that a part of the market that begins to be hard for colleges to compete in is when we all start to learn, when the data starts to show us that immersive experiences are the best way to teach and learn. That then, the universities have trouble. Then it really becomes a technology. Education becomes a technology play And that's really interesting. You'll need assessment people, but you don't necessarily need professors, right? So that's an interesting comment. And then this other piece you mentioned about human skills, I think is also, Andrew and Rufus and I have long been debating this issue of, the traditional college's role is in teaching the human skills and contextualizing them in history or physics or, how much longer? I mean, let me go to Andrew quickly, and then I'm going to come back to Rufus. What evidence do we have that we are making that more explicit, and that therefore that you're showing value in the human skills, so that learners would still continue to come to a not inexpensive college?
Yeah, there's great research from the Association of American Colleges and Universities on what they call it, instead of human skills, they call it essential learning outcomes. And they have a rubric, because we're in higher education and we love our rubrics. And so it's called, valid assessment of learning in undergraduate education. It's focused on the undergraduate level. Actually, some of the 2U folks have taken a look at it. And it's a really deep dive into evaluating those learning outcomes. It's used in community colleges and four-year institutions all over the country. But you talk about to go back to that transparency and that communication issue, it is used deeply in accreditation processes, not so much in communicating to our corporate partners, not so much in marketing our institutions. I wrote a column last year about taking my son around as a prospective student pre-COVID to visit colleges and universities. And at institution after institution, they said, we have this great core curriculum. It's designed so you can take whatever you want. And I said, well, no, it's not. It's designed to try to give you these particular skills, which I would much rather hear that you're trying to, for the investment that I'm making at your institution, give my son or daughter those skill sets that employers want, than talking about the flexibility to take anything you want whenever you want. So I think there's as much of the data is there, but we're doing a very inefficient job of delivering that data and sharing it out with our partners or our very important prospective partners.
Well, so I'll just say we're at the lab finding big take up among colleges in our 21st century skill badges, where they're embedding them in courses, because when the students can actually see the representation of the competencies and the sub-competencies embedded in the course, it both is something they can put on their LinkedIn page, and it's a big aha for them. I want to go to questions we've got Rufus. I'm wondering if let me ask you this question, because this is from the audience. Are there examples of colleges working with private companies today in some, and I know that you've been involved in helping translate the needs of business to the needs of, you've got some, maybe give us one good example that you like.
Well, the example that I'd love to give at this particular point is the construction industry. And the construction industry, and those who are accredited through the National Center for Construction Education and Research. But individual companies now are looking to go directly to individual colleges, and they're looking for leaders who are willing to listen to them, take their curriculum, and in many cases, take some of their faculty and staff and implement it verbatim and see what the impact is. And the example that I like to use is Central Arizona College, who about 4 years ago had approximately a little less than 10 folks, students in their program. And over a 3 to 4 year period, they're now up to 400 students. They have 100% retention, completion, graduation, and jobs. And the company that went to them with this deal said that he had talked to other community colleges, and they did not want to infuse their curriculum. They wanted to stay with their own methodology. And I think advisory boards have told us for years that we needed to listen differently and better and engage our students. This is a model that appears to be working in this institution, and it's one that could be scalable and replicated across the industry. And I think it could be replicated in other industries, such as manufacturing and healthcare and others. But in many cases, the role of faculty needs to change. It needs to look more as a facilitator. And whatever we end up doing, I hope we don't add additional costs to or time to a student so that we have to infuse the notion of soft skills or power skills into the curriculum. And right now it's this battle of we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, but we're not meeting the needs of the workforce.
Well put. John, we have a question for you from the audience. How many of these 300,000 certified people has Google actually hired? And have you actually created a pathway or just another certification?
No, I can tell you that Google has hired some of the people that have gone through that program, and I know other companies have also taken that certificate as currency for qualification at their places as well, specifically the IT cert. The others are a little earlier on, but yeah, I mean, we're eating our own food there, for lack of a better term, in that regard.
Great. And then there's a question that maybe, Ryan, you would like to take a shot at. Someone says, I'm curious what the possibility is to first awaken the purpose of each learner so that they pick an academic path that allows them to be fulfilled and make an impact and grow continually. So I think this is probably riffing off the idea of the guided pathways where you're able to kind of speed date with a number of careers. But I imagine some of the programs that you're developing are along those lines where you can fork them into different academic or career paths after you take a short course?
Yeah, so I'll try to answer the question. But certainly what we're seeing, that careers and the management of a career is shifting from a linear progression with a company where you stay with a company forever. Like we're seeing people take charge of their own career development, and actually having employers not just build a career within that company, but help to fund and facilitate that career development of that individual. So if that's taking the flavor of awakening each learner's purpose, it is to try and understand, well, what is your own, I think Andrew mentioned earlier, your Lego pieces, how you put the Lego pieces together. Are you building the Millennium Falcon, or are you building the Death Star? Or I have a 6-year-old son, so sorry, I'm very familiar with Lego. But how do you pack them all together? And there are many pieces in the way that we do this and how we construct continuous learning. And I think it's whether is it a distinct pathway, or is it a build your own pathway in terms of Lego, where it's more exploratory, how we used to build it as kids versus following a set pattern. And so I'm kind of going off on a bit of a tangent around it. The idea behind this is just to say, what is it that you want to learn, and knowing that you're going to meet a student at various stages throughout their career with different solutions all the time. People are going to put these things together, and how do you make it as easy as possible for them? Maybe, Andrew, that's to your point of how do you build it that you can stack these credentials together in some way that they're recognized by others, and maybe you could follow up from that.
Yeah, Rufus too, but I think the Lego analogy has an elegance in what you just described, because what you want for so many students is to see a very clear path, to build the description of here are the pieces and you're going to be able to build this. But then as they realize, well, I built that, but now I can add the pieces together from different sets. I can create, Hogwarts battling Star Wars and on a Doctor Who TARDIS and whatever. So the ability to put those pieces together to create the futures that you want really ought to be there. And the reality that so often universities have been completely unrealistically biased in saying it's our own courses for 4 years in this box that constitutes a degree. In fact, undervaluing the data that indicates that students from community colleges, from other backgrounds and other pathways tend to succeed at higher rates than students who start as native freshmen. That's really where universities need to adapt. And whether it's based on short courses, on guided pathways, on all these pieces, when universities blow up that model, it's terrifying because they think they'll lose enrollment, but creating greater flexibility will actually increase the opportunity to bring in more students and to have greater loyalty to their institution.
So I want to address, as we're coming towards the, near the end of the panel, two elephants in the room as this ecosystem changes and tries to respond to, a skills-based hiring ecosystem. And one of them is commoditization of content or of learning pieces, and therefore both the business model that gets super challenged at colleges, as well as affordability is opened up to some extent, but what is commoditization doing as we move to kind of just competency-based learning where you can plug anything in on a pathway? And the second is, if we move to, and we have a question from the audience about this, if we're moving to a skills-based just-in-time learning ecosystem on demand, and the only people who are going to college are middle to upper class, let's say people of, coming of age, traditional students, what happens to the human skills that don't get taught in a just-in-time short course? So those are two different questions, and let me just throw it out to whoever feels like they might want to answer one or the other, because those to me are two, the second is an equity question, really, around what are we taking away from people who are just doing just-in-time learning, and the first one is really how do colleges survive when content is free or near free?
Well, Kathleen, I will start, and I think we have an obligation for students and others to actually tell them what the pathways are, but we have an obligation also, especially during this pandemic, to see if we can't get them back to work. And if we can get individuals back to work, we can see that they have multiple skills. They can move in multiple directions. But what they're going to be looking for is an opportunity that has a price point that matches their ability and their time. And the whole notion of equity and diversity is impacting those in our community because they still are having issues with students at home, with older parents, with other kinds of issues. But if we have a clear pathway, and it could be on a guided pathway kind of design, but we need to continue to engage them that this is your possibility. You can start off as a line worker, but within 8 steps, you can go to Arizona State University and get an engineering degree. We need to keep that pathway in front of them so that they can see what the options might be.
And John, do you have, I know you've just done a study about how higher ed and with BCG about how higher ed can work with industry. I mean, you can imagine in Rufus's scenario where somebody could do that while they're working and come in and out of employment?
I think generally everything's on the table. I couldn't agree with Rufus more. I think all these solutions that we're coming up with are really innovative plans that are going to make things in addition to and not in lieu of. I'll go back to, I believe that some of these things that we're talking about in terms of credentialing, frankly, also Andrew and Rufus, I hope we're going to work on divorcing ourselves of traditional education timelines. I think that's an important part of this discussion right now. But I believe that there's going to be a growing of the pool in terms of access to education. And I still believe that higher ed, community colleges, traditional universities, what have you, if we can establish that dialogue that I think we're all espousing, as Ryan said, I think we seem to be united on that. If we establish that dialogue, I do think a holistic learning experience will still be there for many, many students, which I think is valuable, right? As a sales leader, the soft skills that do come with traditional ed is something that I value as well. So I think we're just talking about growing options and therefore opportunity. I think Rufus is right, like getting as many people back to work and therefore as many different learning modicums as we can have, the better. So
just as a closing out, we only have just maybe 2 minutes left. And who wants to take a shot at this? What would a college degree look like in 2 years, or I'm sorry, in 5 years for someone who doesn't have a lot of funding? In other words, maybe only has $5,000 or $10,000 to spend a year at the most.
Yeah, I actually think it'll be the ability to combine the kind of immersive experiences Ryan was talking about, short form courses. We'll get them to work the way Rufus is described. The idea that there's a dichotomous choice between either working or developing essential learning outcomes, I think is a false narrative. I think the idea is that we ought to be able to chew gum and walk at the same time, that we can do both of those things by blending the systems. And we do it cost effectively when we think smartly. So the other piece of collaboration is things like, you know, I see over and over again, the tech sector demanding hard skills and then grabbing the faculty to work in their organizations that we need to teach the hard skills. So we've got to get smarter about how we can create hybrid positions as well and share resources in more creative ways across institutions and with corporate America, not just the degrees, but the people that we need to make these things work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know Google tried, or Howard University did something with Google and tried to, you know, combine professors with as Google fellows. That was quite interesting. I think our time is almost wrapping up. But if you had to give a phrase to say what the ecosystem looks like, we've heard from Andrew. I think it's hybrid, mixed courses, maybe short form. Or will people go to college for 4 years? I mean, will that still happen?
They'll go to college forever if we do it right.
Continuous. That's my phrase.
Evolving.
Evolving. John, do you want to have the last word?
Look, you mentioned the BCG study, and there's a couple of data points that they came out with, and the conclusion of it was like, corporate America and employers want a deeper relationship with higher ed. It's not that anybody's trying to divorce that relationship, but they just want that real-time feedback loop. Less than 35% of corporate leaders think that grads are equipped, but 81% of those same business leaders feel like higher ed plays an integral role in this. So it seems like the audience is there on both sides. I believe there's an opportunity, if that relationship happens, there's an opportunity for higher ed to participate in upskilling on an ongoing basis, which I think is what Ryan kind of was alluding to, going to college for 10 years in some ways, like that should be an ongoing skill enhancement because of the demands of the marketplace. And I believe that's possible now as a result of this moment.
Well, thank you all for this great walk through the future of these three sectors, and we'll turn it back over to the hosts at the ASU GSV Summit. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you.